Coordinated attack playbook. Simple, cheap, devastating. Start with a team you wouldn't notice. 2 people in a dusty pickup roll past a rural fence line twice a week for a month. They learn the shift change by the taillights, note when the patrol slows, and count the camera sweeps. They don't need badges. They need a cheap quadcopter, bolt cutters, a few magazines, and a hand-drawn list of gear inside the fence. The control house, the fiber entry conduit, the radiator banks that bleed a transformer when punctured low. The target list isn't mysterious. Extra high voltage transformers that feed metro cores, control houses where relay panels accept commands, fiber trunks that carry SCADA and synchrofaser data back to dispatch. They choose yards with straight bus topologies where a single breaker failure takes out a bay, and yards with old fences that meet OSHA more than deterrence. They mark which banks share a spare and which don't. They look for radiator arrays within easy rifle distance of a field that nobody watches at 2 a.m. Timing is the force multiplier. Choose a night when weather already trims margin, heat that droops lines, or cold that thickens gas and slows combustion. Pick the hour a system transitions between shifts, when the radio chatter turns to handoffs and eyes move from screens to forms. If they want to be quiet, they start with the fiber. A shovel and a locator app are enough to find the line trench where it hugs the property edge. Cut the wrong bundle, and the yard goes dark to the control room. Operators see the tag, loss of communications, and mark it. In isolation, it's a nuisance. In a coordinated hit, it's the blindfold. The rifle work isn't fancy. Transformers are armored against mistakes, not against intent. Aim at the bottom of a radiator bank or the header, and hot oil drains like a wound. The bank trips on low oil or on sudden pressure if the shot rattles a baffle. A control house window isn't strong. A few rounds into breaker cabinets can jam mechanisms or shatter auxiliary power supplies. They aren't trying to blow a yard sky high, they're trying to turn it off long enough that it matters elsewhere. Meanwhile, a second team across a state line repeats the pattern. Their target feeds a gas compressor station that keeps fuel moving to generators. Take the station's power, the compressor's idle, and gas pressure droops a few hours later. The generation you counted on to backfill the first hit underperforms. That lag is the point. Staggered physical hits create delayed cascades that land as operators are still triaging the first loss. Blend-in tactics help them disappear. Rural trailheads at dawn, vests that say fiber locate bought online, a white utility bucket parked for 10 minutes near a roadside cabinet. They avoid urban sites with armed guards and chase the forgotten corners where a single road gate is the security plan. If they're careful, they never cross the fence. They don't need to. The digital assist is blunt. While teams cut fiber, a wiper malware strains toward operator desktops and historian servers at the utilities control center. It's not Stuxnet, it's a distraction. Wipe the HMI screens or crash the engineering workstations at 2:14 a.m. and the first phone calls go to it. Alarm floods now look like software trouble. Restoration scripts hide in shared drives that suddenly read empty. People lose minutes, resetting sessions and rebooting as the physical picture changes. Cheap drones add eyes where cameras don't. Fly a quick loop behind the transformer bay to confirm the oil level dropping, then drop the drone in a pond and walk away. Send a drone to hover in front of a camera for 20 seconds at 3 sites to force operators to log nuisance alarms. Stack enough nuisance, and you slow the brain just enough for the physics to run ahead. What nobody wants to admit is how little it takes to create strategic effects. You don't need precision explosives or insider keys. A few synchronized, low-skill actions aimed at the right assets can produce N2 or N3 conditions across regions that weren't planning to share pain that night. Under-frequency load shedding will try to save the machine, but shedding while blind risks cutting the wrong blocks, stranding hospitals without knowing it, and tripping cold load pickup loops that make restoration more brittle. Why it works comes back to the choke points. Extra high voltage transformers can't be replaced quickly. Large spares are mismatched or far. Control houses bundle nerves in one small building that relies on local AC for HVAC. Fiber trunks enter exactly where a contractor found it easiest a decade ago. Even with fast utility response, the first hours belong to physics and logistics. Replace oil, you need a truck, a clean supply, and time for degassing. Replace fiber. You need a splice and a crew under lights while deputies block a lane. Weather magnifies everything. Hit lines and transformers during a heat wave, and sags and ratings shrink the options. Hit during a cold snap, and gas supply falters on its own, doubling the stack. Make the events just far enough apart that each control room thinks it owns a local mess, and you delay the call for regional help that would tighten frequency and share reserves. Every missed minute is another swing before damping catches. None of this is a blueprint. It's an uncomfortable truth about exposed surfaces. The machine rewards patience and punishes speed. A cheap, quiet plan beats loud theatrics. And intent, aimed at the seams and the choke points, turns accidents like that dim night into something much harder to stop. Case studies, Metcalfe, Ukraine, and the lessons we ignored. Started a fence line south of San Jose, April 16, 2013. A service road, a chain-link perimeter, and a substation that fed Silicon Valley's load like an artery. The attackers didn't need to cross the fence. They unscrewed 2 manhole covers and cut fiber leading into the yard. Then, using a rifle and a rest, they fired into radiator banks and transformer cases from outside the property, walking rounds across fins to drain oil. In 19 minutes, they knocked out 17 transformers. They left in the dark the way they came. No slogans, no manifesto, just method. What mattered wasn't the body count of equipment, it was the craft. They knew where the fiber entered. They understood that hitting the bottom of a radiator accelerates oil loss. They shot through a chain-link fence, accounting for deflection. They paced the job to avoid overheating barrels and to keep the sound from drawing a quick response. The operators kept lights on by rerouting, but that wasn't the point. Metcalfe proved a substation could be turned off with simple tools and patience, and that the replacement window for big iron doesn't fit inside a news cycle. Investigators and utility engineers read the report with a shiver. Ballistic walls went up around some banks. Cameras got better. Perimeters thickened at the sites with budgets and attention. Elsewhere, the fixes were thinner: signage, lighting, hope. Insurance policies evolved faster than concrete. Risk shifted on paper, deductibles, exclusions, force majeure, while the hardware stayed in place. Now jump east, past fences to keyboards. Ukraine, December 23, 2015. Office hours. Operators at 3 distribution companies watched their cursors move across screens they weren't touching. Breakers began opening one by one, remotely, as if an invisible hand leaned over their shoulders. The attackers had spent months inside the networks, mapping, learning vendor tools, rehearsing. When they struck, they used the same remote access software the utilities used every day, plus wiper malware to brick workstations and phone systems. In about 6 hours, they cut power to around 225,000 customers. The detail that still lands: they locked out the operators and then sent crews to the field to flip manual switches to slow restoration. They jammed call centers so customers couldn't report what was out. They hit uninterruptible power supplies in control rooms to darken screens. It was the same grid logic in a different accent. Attack nerves, break trust in the picture, force manual work under pressure. The lights came back the same day, but the lesson stayed. Digital access can move breakers as surely as a hand in a relay cabinet. A year later, Ukraine again, Kiev, 2016. This time, a more automated strike at a transmission substation. Fewer human-in-the-loop clicks, more code, Industria speaking industrial protocols to protection devices. The attackers understood grid semantics, how to talk IEC and trip breakers in sequence. They used a wiper again and a logic bomb to complicate restoration. The outage was shorter, but the signal was louder. If someone bothers to learn your device's language, they can push the same buttons you can, faster. Across the border of industries, another data point: a German steel mill, 2014. Attackers pivoted from it into a plant and caused physical damage by preventing a blast furnace from shutting down in a controlled way. Different sector, same anatomy, legacy control, trust paths, physics turned against the owner. It underlined the uncomfortable truth: you don't need perfect access to trigger expensive breakage when controls assume good intent. So what changed here? After Metcalfe, some sites added ballistic shielding and moved fiber entries inside the fence. Some utilities hardened control houses, separated AC feeds for HVAC, and added redundant communications. After Ukraine, utilities accelerated multi-factor authentication for remote access, tightened vendor tunnels, and added out-of-band monitoring to cross-check SCADA. Industry groups wrote playbooks. Exercises ran. People practiced calling each other faster. And what didn't change? Lead times. The scarcity of large transformers grew worse. Distribution transformer shortages spilled into headlines, but extra high-voltage units were the real pinch. Standardization crawled. Spare programs remained constrained by mismatched designs and legal agreements that moved slower than crisis clocks. Regulatory incentives still favored today's rate relief over capital set aside for a maybe. Insurance shifted incentives too. Carriers raised premiums, narrowed coverage, and pushed liability onto asset owners and vendors. That pressure produced checklists, more cameras, more logs, but did conjure transformer factories, retrained relay technicians, or new DC ties? It made boards ask, are we compliant? More often than are we resilient? Compliance mattered. Attackers don't care. Meanwhile, the grid added millions of inverters that play by different rules. Ukraine's second strike targeted transmission controls, not inverter farms, but the interaction risk grew. Ride-through settings became national debates after disturbances in Australia and Europe. Here, operators began asking for grid-forming behavior in pockets while they still relied on synchronous inertia elsewhere. The transition widened the surface. The meta lesson from all three cases is boring and hard. Attackers mix patient reconnaissance with simple tools. They aim for choke points and confidence. They don't need to break everything. They need to break a few things in the right order and force you to make rushed choices. Defenders have to be good everywhere, while carrying the dead weight of aging iron, slow supply chains, and human fatigue. The stories rhyme across fences and fiber. While that was happening in California and Kyiv, one state chose to stand alone for speed and sovereignty. Texas wrote its own rules and lived the upside until weather wrote the bill. Texas, isolation by design, failure by weather. Texas didn't stumble into independence, it engineered it. Decades ago, lawmakers and utilities kept wires inside the state line to avoid federal jurisdiction. That choice hardened into physics. ERCOT became a single balancing authority, a market and control room that answered mostly to Austin, not Washington. In normal weather, the model felt slick, fast dispatch, lean reserve margins, prices that cracked a whip at generators. The risk was always offstage, when the fence also kept help out. February 2021 dragged that risk into the light. Cold marched south and sat on the state like a hand over a mouth. Gas wells froze at the tree, gathering lines sludged, and compressor stations drew more power just as their feeds stuttered. Coal piles crusted, plant sensors lied, heat rates climbed, and some units simply wouldn't start. Wind lost output in places, so did gas and coal in bigger slices. By the early hours, ERCOT watched its resource stack shed weight faster than operators could prop it up. Frequency began to slide toward a cliff. In the control room, the calculus turned brutal. If they didn't dump load, the whole interconnection risked a collapse that could take weeks to rebuild. They ordered the largest manual load shed in US history. Neighborhoods went dark in blocks, then stayed dark as restoration hit cold load pickup walls. Under those rolling, blackouts sat a number that would haunt the postmortems: 4 minutes and 37 seconds. That's how close the system came to a full blackout. Not metaphorically, literally a handful of grid cycles from lights out, everywhere inside the fence. Isolation sharpened every edge. Those DC ties to neighbors, they existed, but they were eyedroppers against a house fire. Imports couldn't flood in the way they do across the eastern seams. ERCOT's market design, scarcity pricing meant to shout at investors, did its job on paper, spiking to the cap. But price signals don't thaw valves, fix plant heat tracing, or conjure black start capacity you didn't contract. The physics set the tempo, the market chased behind. Black start planning in Texas looked adequate on a map. On the night, the details bit. Some units that carried the black start tag struggled in the cold. Auxiliary systems needed power that wasn't where it was supposed to be. Crews had to navigate iced roads to reach switches that hadn't been touched in years. Re-energizing lines risked tripping on cold load surges. Restoration became a careful creep, not a steady march. Meanwhile, pipes burst, hospitals rationed diesel, and water systems lost pressure. Political aftermath was loud. Hearings, finger-pointing, and a rush of winterization promises filled the weeks after. Rules tightened on paper. Plants were told to insulate, heat trace, and test. Gas suppliers were told to register as critical load to avoid rolling outages. A new weatherization regime arrived, with inspections and fines. Some operators did the work. Others did enough to pass a checklist. The first winters after Uri ran milder in key moments, and the story started to fade. Compliance is a flaw. The storm doesn't care. ERCOT's structure remained the same, fast, self-contained, and exposed when the state-scale correlation hits. Heat waves brought a different flavor of the same stress. Afternoon loads smashed records, and dispatch leaned on everything: wind over the plains, solar at noon, gas peakers at dusk, batteries to bridge the step down. Reserve margins improved on paper, but many megawatts lived in fragile corners, fuel limited, weather limited, or new fleets still learning their controls. Curtailments of renewable output appeared not because there was too much energy, but because voltage and stability constraints pinched transfer paths. The gas-electric handshake stayed messy. Generators buy gas in markets that assume power will flow to compressors. Electric utilities count on gas showing up without seeing the upstream bottlenecks. During cold snaps, both systems become each other's precondition. ERCOT can't order gas to flow. Pipeline operators can't order electrons to reach their stations when feeders are being shed. Federal help on standards stopped at the fence. Coordination improved around the edges, lists of critical facilities, better comms, but the hard structural fix remained elusive. And those DC ties, calls to add more, always run into the same wall: politics and permits. More interconnection would mean more federal oversight, plus new corridors through land that doesn't want them. Proposals to build back-to-back converters on the edge or to upgrade existing links inch through studies, while load grows faster than paperwork. The irony stands: the cheapest resilience megawatt may be a tie you hope to never max out. The check arrives before the vote. Here's where the lesson returns to people. During Uri, distribution crews stood in ice fog closing manual switches with gloved hands so a hospital could get one feeder over another. Operators watched frequency, calculating how much more to cut without breaking a refinery's restart sequence. Families burned furniture. Plumbers became first responders. ERCOT didn't fail to care. It failed to have enough slack inside a fence that weather can cross in an hour. Texas chose isolation. It got speed and sovereignty. It also got a thinner margin for mistakes and a smaller cushion when nature sinks its punches. The fence is real. The weather doesn't see it. The seams, weak DC links, and regulatory friction. While Texas was icing over, something else defined the limits of help: the seams. Along the borders where the eastern and western hearts touch, and where ERCOT brushes both, power only crosses through a handful of high-voltage DC converters. Think of them as valves between pressure systems. They're precise, controllable, and small. That control is the upside. You can meter stress, stabilize angles, and shut the door fast if trouble tries to move. The downside is capacity. In a crunch, they're eyedroppers feeding a grid that needs fire hoses. These converters sit at places with dry names, back-to-back stations, terminals at the ends of long lines, but their decisions whisper through frequency everywhere. When an operator in the east opens a valve westward, they're trading stability margin for relief. The trouble is, the installed valves number in the fews and tens, not dozens in parallel. Their ratings were set for commerce, not mutual defense. When heat domes park across time zones or cold bites from Alberta to the Gulf, those megawatts get spoken for instantly. The seams hold their ground, and the islands ride it out alone. Why don't we build bigger valves? Start with land. A single HVDC corridor can require easements across ranches, farms, tribal lands, and national forests. Each parcel has a voice. County boards argue setbacks. Homeowner groups lawyer up. Environmental reviews measure birds, viewsheds, and soils, then get appealed. Even when a line mostly rides existing rights-of-way, turning that into a new voltage class triggers hearings that last longer than a transformer lead time. By the time a utility wins, the load forecast has shifted, and the project's economics need another filing. Then stack the agencies. FERC approves interstate transmission rates and reliability standards. State commissions approve siting and cost recovery, regional planners run their own studies, federal land managers own corridors you can't skip. A developer can spend 5 years getting a map and still lack the authority to plant a single steel pole. Meanwhile, every opponent only needs one court to stall the train. NIMBY, not in my backyard, has a twin in banana, build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. Reliability needs aren't abstract, but in a quiet year they sound like scare tactics in a hearing room. Inside the interconnections, the friction continues. The East isn't one market, it's a quilt. PJM, MISO, SBP, NYISO, ISO-NI, each with a planning manual and tariff stack. A line that crosses 2 regions has to clear 2 sets of benefit tests: reliability, economic, policy. If it doesn't pencil in both, it sits. Merchant developers try to thread the needle with HVDC projects that sell point-to-point capacity to whoever bids, but they still need land and permits. Policy thinks in terms of decarbonization targets and affordability today. Wires promise benefits over decades and cost money now. Utilities don't rush to help competitors either. A new seam can shift congestion rents, strand old plants, and change who gets paid to be essential. Incumbents are polite in public filings and careful in private. They collaborate to the edge of their incentives. Regional entities write coordinated into charters, lawyers write exceptions into contracts. The result is a maze where a good idea has a short half-life without an unusually stubborn sponsor. Proposals for a national HVDC backbone keep landing on desks. The idea is simple: overlay a few thousand miles of high-capacity DC that can swing power between the 3 hearts, smooth weather, and catch regional falls before they become cascades. Studies show the math working: diverse wind in the plains balancing solar in the deserts, batteries bridging dusk in one place with noon somewhere else. The objections come as a litany: who pays, who benefits, who controls the switches, whose view gets the towers. Without a single planner in charge, the epic becomes a patchwork of local fights. Even where seams already exist, they're not frictionless. Converter stations need maintenance outages, control systems evolve, and firmware in one terminal drifts out of compatibility with its mate. During fire season, the AC lines feeding the DC terminals get derated, strangling the valve before you touch its setpoint. In winter, ice loading forces temporary limits. Operators with scars trade caution for capacity. The system favors conservative transfers on bad days, exactly when you wish it would reach farther. There's a governance gap too. FERC's reliability authority reaches across the East and West, but not into ERCOT the same way. Coordinating standards at a seam means agreeing to rules nobody wants to be alone in enforcing. Cyber posture varies. Remedial action schemes that span borders require test beds, joint drills, and trust. The failure mode is paper, a plan that lives in a shared folder and dies in the first minute of a real event because the phone tree didn't update. Yet the need keeps growing. Data centers spring up far from big dams and nukes. Factories hungry for megawatts return to states that haven't built new backbone in decades. Renewables grow where they're least politically painful, not where existing wires point. The seams feel that misalignment first. Power wants to flow east-west in a grid whose arteries were laid north-south. Without new valves, operators burn margin to steer around bottlenecks, then cross their fingers when weather synchronizes the punch. So picture the first hours of a multi-region hit with this context. The valves open to their limits, alarms insist they're near. Dispatchers call neighbors and get the same answer: "We're tight too." Meanwhile, political promises about sharing across the nation meet a control room reality. "We did, it's maxed, and physics takes it from here." The seam isn't a conspiracy. It's a design choice that made sense when big plants sat near big cities and where the correlation lived in smaller footprints. Today, the correlation stretches. The seams stayed small.